Thank you very much, Daphne. Welcome to our webinar this week, The Many Faces of Anti-Semitism. I'm happy that you're with us today once again. I would like to welcome Dr. Ralf Balke, our speaker today. I'm going to say a few words about him. And I also thank you very much to our interpreter, Michael Lebiach, once again, who's going to translate simultaneously. I'm looking forward to an exciting round today. Dr. Ralf Balke is a journalist and historian, and he does research on the uh, Federal Group of National Socialists in Palestine. He currently writes a lot about politics for the Jüdische Allgemeine, the newspaper in Germany, but also for the Frankfurter Allgemeine, another German newspaper. And today he's going to talk about the anti-Semitic response to the Hamas attacks of the 7th of October. We were able to see a lot of these responses in Berlin. Ralf, I remember quite vividly right after the 7th of October. Here in Israel, I got scared calls from my parents, etc. And I heard that about there was an attack on the synagogue in the Brunnenstraße in Berlin 10 days after that. It was real vandalism and scenes of violence in New Cologne, which is in Berlin. And uh, the fact that these attacks were celebrated in the streets of Berlin as shocking, and this is just one case of many cases that we see in Europe and the US, just everywhere in the world. And I think, and this is what we want to talk about today. This micro example of Berlin is going to show us today which kind of anti-Semitic reactions actually happened after the 7th of October, what kind of things are behind all of that, and what kind of debates all of this led. Dr. Balke is going to give a half-hour presentation. And afterwards, we've got time for questions and answers. Thanks for everyone for being here. Dr. Ralf Balke, thanks very much that you took the time out of your day to be with us, and we're looking forward for your presentation. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be able to talk here today. So I'm going to talk about a topic that Mark already described, and trying to show how in Germany, especially in Berlin, the situation looks like, how the anti-Semitic reactions and responses to the Hamas attacks of the 7th October actually look like. As you can see by the pens I chose, that looked like and not look like, that you can see that there are look like and not look like. You can see that there are still ongoing issues, and not just only happened around the Hamas attack. I'm going to get started with the topic with an incident that Mark mentioned, and I, as an author of the Jüdische Allgemeine newspaper, reported about. It was the fire attack on the synagogue in Brunnenstraße in Berlin on the night of the 18th of October. So pretty much exactly 11 days after the Hamas attack. 2 unknown people have thrown 2 self-made Molotov cocktails onto the building, but that didn't lead to any major damage or didn't hurt any people anyway. A 30-year-old person was riding a e-scooter headed towards the building whilst the police was investigating the incident. He was arrested immediately. Afterwards, the politicians reacted. Chancellor Olaf Scholz declared that attacks on Jewish institutions cannot be justified, and authorities shall not allow any demonstrations of anti-Semitic slogans or where the Hamas terror is being celebrated. On the same afternoon, the Berlin Mayor Kai Wegner and Joe Kiao, called Senator, and Iris Spranger, Interior Minister, went to the Brunnenstraße to show their solidarity. And Wegner said that fire attacks on the synagogues are attacks on all of us, and there is no space for anti-Semitism in Berlin. The actually interesting part is that whilst the politicians uttered these words, a lot of cars were driving by where celebratory shouting was being heard, such as Free Palestine, Viva Palestina, these slogans that you know. Why did I talk about that scene that I was able to see with my own eyes? Why do I explain it in such great detail? There's a very easy reason. The situation, but not just in Berlin, is the situation in a nutshell. It is this scissors between the kind of gap between the official rhetoric and reality, where while the people uttered those sentences that you've heard 100 times, that there's no space for anti-Semitism, hate against Jews was happening at the same time, but nothing was done against it. There was a lot of police there, but no one who took those people were passing by and brought them to justice. When I wanted to ask and make some inquiries and ask why there's this official obvious discrepancy between what was being said and the reality, the assistant of the mayor said that their hands are bound. They can actually not legally pursue these calls, and these are just provocations. And this basically shows one of the underlying problems, not just for Jewish people who live in Berlin or Germany, and it is the legal framework that actually keeps a lot of opportunities for people to act openly anti-Semitic. That already happened between the 7th of October. It wasn't easy for Jewish people in Germany. And this actually led to people talking about so-called no-go areas in Berlin. In Berlin, it's the district of Neukölln, New Cologne, which is kind of a symbol of this no-go areas. In May 2021, when the Hamas once again targeted Israel by shooting rockets, and Israel responded on the Sonnenallee, one of the central streets in this district. There were violent demonstrations. So this shows that these 3,000 demonstrants, who were mostly from Arabic background, there were young men shouting Allahu Akbar, and it attacked policemen. In one day, 93 policemen were sometimes severely hurt. These kind of incidences already happened in the year 2014, and the year where there was one of the first bigger confrontations between the Hamas and Israel. On the basis of this experience, that, well, you could have tried to gather in the past 10 years. So it's not a surprise then that there were violent demonstrations against Jewish people in Berlin, but also the open hate for Israel on the street. So they had 10 years time to act, but nothing really happened. Quite the opposite, actually. Politicians refused to even consider anti-Semitism from the migrant background as anti-Semitism over those 10 years. And the official statistics, criminals who are right-wing extremists were usually stated there. Recently, in 2022, to 84% of anti-Semitic incidents were traced back to them. In the past, there was already criticism about this narrative because crimes were immediately considered crimes by right-wing extremists when it wasn't quite clear who was the real perpetrator. The Bundestag has a expert group on this, and an internal letter by the Interior Ministry already criticized this beforehand. So for years, they knew that the statistics that were published were not reliable. And the criticism was also by a lot of studies criticized, for instance, a study by the University of Bielefeld that was published more than 7 years ago. They said that the problem was how police perceives these crimes. Back then, they already said that victims of anti-Semitic acts of violence were usually 81% of them said that the perpetrators, the alleged perpetrators, are usually Muslims and people with a migration background. The problem was that in the past and also in the present, a problem with the police and the justice is that they don't have the knowledge how to exactly detect anti-Semitism and react accordingly. One example that shows how absurd this is was the fire attack on the synagogue in the city of Wuppertal in the year 2014 by 3 young Palestinians. With their actions, they only wanted to refer to the Gaza war. That's what they said before court. They were arrested and put before court. They stated they're not anti-Semites. There was nothing, they don't have anything against Jewish people, and the court believed that and said that they don't have any proof that would say that the 3 Palestinians were anti-Semitic. This goes to show how often federal institutions or justice had issues to deal with this problem adequately. But let's talk about those days after the 7th of October and what happened then. The extent of anti-Semitic violence that we were able to see even shocked experts. And not just the extent, but also the shape of the violence. I can give you some figures that show that this RIAS is the source, so that is the Federal Association for Research on Anti-Semitism. In the past few years, there was a continuous increase that was mostly related to a higher willingness to report these incidents if you were confronted with them, but also with the phenomenons that were connected to the corona pandemic. The situation changed after the 7th of October immediately. A few figures. In the entire year of 2020, there were 1,957 verified anti-Semitic incidents, so roughly 5 per day. Then in 2021, there were already 2,773, so 8 days, 8 cases of verified anti-Semitism per day, and in 2022, 2,480, so roughly 7 cases per day. When you just look at the period between the 7th of October and the 9th of November, there were 994 incidents. So we can see a spike from roughly 6, 7, or maximum of 8 cases to 29 cases per day for that period of 5 weeks. Or to put it in another words, the number of incidents increased fourfold. And it's also interesting to see where these incidents happens. 40% of them happened on the street, in 387 of those 994 verified cases. Roughly 190 cases happened on the internet. The vast majority of incidents, which is 854, included insults, but also there were 72 cases of damage to things, and some cases of threats and physical violence that were registered. And please remember, all of these things happened within less than 5 weeks after the 7th of October. What also happened immediately afterwards was a celebration of the massacres near the Gaza Strip on the same day. On the Sonnenallee, the central street in the Berlin district of Neukölln, I've already mentioned it before. It is a district with a high proportion of people with a migration background, people from Syria or Arabic countries. There were spontaneous celebrations where people passed sweets to passerbys. There were the first violent incidents on the police at roughly at the same time, when police tried to intervene with these spontaneous demonstrations. What's interesting in this context is that people appeared here who are part of the criminal clans in Berlin. Arafat Abu Shaka, one of the leading heads of the so-called criminal clan. All of these demonstrations on this Sonnenallee that took place that evening, they were the kickoff for several dozen pro-Palestinian demonstrations with sometimes more than 1,000 or thousands of participants in Berlin. Back then, on the evening on the 7th of October, there was another group who were also co-initiators, and there's kind of the connection between political Islam and the migrants in Germany, and also to the leftists and the leftist groups. And this organization is the organization called Samidun. Samidun itself, in case you haven't heard about it beforehand, it was founded in 2012 in the USS, and they're very close to the People's Front in Palestine, and they're clearly connected to them. Samidun claims to trying to help Palestinian prisoners in Israel, but they also support the boycott movement BDS, and they collect money for them. In Berlin, there are roughly 100 people who are part of this network, and this network acted in the weeks after the 7th of October, together with radical leftists, in other also deal with people of the Communist Congress. Samidun works together with Migrantifa, that was founded after the racist attacks in Hanau a few years ago, and they pretend to want to draw attention to racism, but they are very close to pro-Palestinian movements. And the integration officer, Ms. Gunabalshi, they already threaten her with violence. Samidun is not even mentioned in the Secret Service report in Northern Rhine-Westphalia, but in the beginning of November, it was banned by the Interior Minister Nancy Faeser. And there's also a ban of activities against the Hamas in Germany, who roughly have around 450 active members in Germany and active supporters. And in Berlin, in a few weeks after that, in the middle of December, 3 alleged members were arrested for planning attacks on Jewish institutions. The Hamas wasn't working as the Hamas there, but they chose more neutral names such as the Association of Palestinian Communities or Al-Aqsa Donation Association. Their goal was to collect money for the Hamas fighters in Palestine and to find some space for those Hamas members or terrorists who work in Europe. Since 2001, the Hamas is part of the terror list of the European Union, but only since 2021, so 20 years after that, they were banned, and showing the Hamas flag was also banned in Germany. Now, 2 or 3 years later, the ban only came about. I think so. As we can see with the Hamas, it took a long time for the politicians to act and to stop the Hamas, at least officially. Another area that was, or group that appeared and that and were very anti-Semitic, where the student were some students. There was a sit-in in front of the Foreign Office in Berlin. Several hundred people who protested against the Israel military reaction to the 7th of October. They were shouting "Free Palestine from German guilt." And what's interesting about that is that this slogan, when you translate, it's just a translation into English from what right-wing extremists said in the past, where they called for stop talking about German guilt and the consequences of the German crimes against Jews. There's another traditional line that should be mentioned in this context, and this can be traced back to the years of the student movements in the late 60s, when left-wing extremists who then became left-wing terrorists, they stated that they now have to stop talking about Jewish people. In one of their publications said, I quote, when we finally learned how to understand this anti-Zionist ideology of right-wing extremists, we have to be clear and show clear solidarity with al-Fatah and we have to fight the Third Reich of the past. Sentences like these surely something that participants of these demonstrations in Berlin would certainly agree with that, but the radical Islamist Hamas are the ones that they are show their solidarity with. So they don't even work with the Al-Fatah that tries to look progressive to the outside. The hate for Israel was also brought into the universities. On the 14th of December, at the Freie Universität in Berlin, a group called FU Students for Free Palestines blocked a auditorium in the university because there was a email by the head of the university where they say that they grieve for all those victims, and we want to express our solidarity with all those bereaved who have lost family or friends or still worried for them. And these sentences made groups such as FU, Students for Free Palestine, made them escalate. The head of the university said that they are complicit with the Israel genocide of the Palestinian people. That's what they claimed. And other groups such as Young Struggle, Migrantifa, I've mentioned them beforehand, and also groups such as Palestine Speaks. During that blockage of the auditorium, they gave presentations on the topic of German guilt. They claimed that Israel should not exist, and they never mentioned the massacres of the 7th of October. One note on my behalf, I personally always think it's very interesting that this total phraseology and all those phrases and slogans of those activists, they always do that in English, but if you translate them into German, then they would sound some of these terms actually remind you of the language that the great parents of those students used. And I think these kind of group names such as Young Struggle are very interesting. I think it's very close to the book My Struggle. Jewish students were not allowed to access the auditorium during that blockage. They were shouted at as fucking Zionists. They were insulted, and this is also that also goes to show that in these kind of groups, Jewish people are called Zionists and are perceived as Zionists. And the people think that they have to fight these people. So it's not just the hate, it's not just for Israel, but also against Jewish people who live in Germany. The blockage of the auditorium lasted for 6 hours before the police intervened. It was not the only incident that happened. There was Islamist groups such as Reality Islam handed out flyers at the university. They harassed and insulted students at the university. The head of the university didn't do anything against that. They didn't do anything to protect Jewish students. As a consequence, Jewish students said that they would do everything in order to not be able to be perceived as Jewish people. So they tried to hide the necklaces. Some of them didn't even dare to go to university. There was a climate of fear. And at the beginning of February, Taft Shapira, a Jewish student, was beaten up by a student with an Arabic migration background. The Jewish student received several fractures in his face and had to be hospitalized. The university, once again, didn't react properly. The perpetrator of that anti-Semitic act of violence was not banned from university. It took days for the head of the university to ban him for 3 months from the university. But since there were was a semester break anyway, people thought this was ridiculous. But he was also still allowed to take part in online events. The Freie Universität in Berlin claims this was an isolated case. But when you take a look at the University of Arts, something similar happened. On the 13th of November, there was a macabre incident where more than 100 students gathered where they screamed, condemned genocide, where they colored their hands red to demonstrate against Israel. I don't know if they were conscious about it, but they used pictures from the Second Intifada, the picture of a Palestinian who in October of 2020 killed two Israelis who accidentally took the wrong turn. They slaughtered them, and then there were their hands covered in blood. They hold them up. They held them up. The University of the Arts also didn't react properly, and these so examples I've just mentioned show that anti-Semitism in the wake of the 7th of October is not just a problem that can be located in groups who have a migration background, but also in academic areas. And there was a lot of financial support from the from federal institutions in Germany, actually. The senator of Berlin thought he wanted to have a anti-Semitism law clause, which says that public actors and players should not use any anti-Semitic or anti-queer slogans. So first of all, that actually sounds like something you should take for granted, and there shouldn't be any protest against it. But the word anti-Semitic word was used in this context. So there was a tsunami of protests. There were calls for boycotts in the internet. There was a call called Strike Germany, where international workers in the area of culture should no longer accept invitations from Germany because they said that in Germany there's no space to express your solidarity with Palestinians. It actually led to a long list of signatures. The French winner of the literature Nobel Prize also signed this letter. But people were also fighting about how to define anti-Semitism, and the cultural senator wanted to use the IHRA definition as the basis for this clause, which also includes Israel-related anti-Semitism. And this was the reason for the conflict and why there were such massive reactions internationally, but were also other legal issues that led to the anti-Semitism clause being off the table before it was even introduced. And at the end of 2020, January 2020, 24, sorry, it was no longer up for debate. We don't know if there's going to be a new version of this clause, because there is a similar clause in the Bundesland of Schleswig-Holstein, where they did something similar, but they used a very painstaking formulation. I hope with those with those words and minutes, I was able to give you an overview of the situation in Germany after the 7th of October, and also what's probably going to happen in the future. And I'm happy if you have any kind of questions now. You have to switch on your mic. If you have any kind of questions, you are allowed to ask them. You're welcome to ask them. Please raise your hand so I can see you and give the floor to you. I can't see any raised hands at the moment. But in the meantime, I would say and ask Ralf, actually, you said you talked very in great detail about the activities of several groups. Is there anything about what anything that can give you some help in guessing how the um, regular people in Berlin react? Is there sympathy or criticism for these kind of demonstrations? What is the average citizen's opinion? Maybe they don't actively take part in these demonstrations, but just observe them. So that's an interesting question, actually. I'd say I'd put this question in a certain context. Most of you probably know that in Germany for months, there's a massive discussion about the question of migration and people moving here from other countries. May they be refugees, may they be economic refugees or regular migrants. I think people who are indifferent to the Middle East conflict, they usually have negative connotations when it comes to the idea of accepting more migrants. I think these pictures that you saw not only after the 7th of October, but also in May 2021 of dozens and hundreds of young men, obviously of Arabic origin, who were shouting Allah Akbar and attacking policemen. They usually feel very threatened. So it usually has a negative impact. I assume it has a negative impact on people accepting migration. The way that we did in the past. So most of these uh, people who protested actually didn't do themselves any good. I've got people who raised their hand. The first one is Daniel Benamid, then Barbara and Christoph Gartenschmidt. Daniel, please go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. First of all, you may not have the data for this, but is there a breakdown of the kind of people involved in these demonstrations? So, for example, we know some of them are Arabs, and presumably a lot of those will be like first generation recent migrants. But how many are ethnic Germans? How many are maybe Turkish people who are second or third generation? How many are foreign students? I mean, I know this data may not be available, but if it is, I think it would be very interesting. And the second question is, what about anti-Semitism in more elevated circles? For example, the Berlinale, the Berlin International Film Festival, you know, when you have people making, at the very least, questionable statements there. Do you see many similar things to that, and how would you assess those kind of things?
Shall I answer in German or English? What you want? I think the interpreter is with us, so you can speak German or English, whatever you prefer. I think I'm going to explain it in German because I was speaking German beforehand. So I think it depends on who actually organizes these demonstrations. There are different kind of groups who mobilize different people in different contexts. So as I explained, we've got this spectrum of Samidum Palestine talks. So these includes people who are who have a migration background, second generation, first generation, usually people who actually can speak German, maybe also some well, you have to, it's quite difficult to differentiate between Germans and non-Germans because you can't really put numbers to these. Some of them have the German citizenship, so it's difficult to say, well, they aren't German, because they do have the passport, but they do have a different kind of origin. So every kind of demonstration, every single demonstration has its own, let's call it fan base. Of course, this is classic leftist groups who have their own demonstrations where you can see people who are mostly German, non-migrant Germans. That's quite interesting. There's a phenomenon, especially with this sit-in in front of the Foreign Affairs Office. There were a lot of Europeans and US Americans who took part in this. So students, expats in the age cohort of 20 to mid-30s who usually come from Spain or Italy or the US, they also protest. So it depends on the event and the context. You have different kind of groups. Of course, you have groups and demonstrations who clearly have an Islamic or Islamistic background. And then there are also expats from the US or England, where so it's different. It depends on who calls for the demonstration. So you can say there's either migrants or anti-imperialistic or anti-fascist. So it depends on the Europeans and Americans who and what group they think they belong. When it comes to the culture institutions, you mentioned the Berlinale beforehand. So it's nothing new. It's usually it's a thing that's this hate against Israel and anti-Semitic attitude that you see there. We were already able to see it in the Documenta in Kassel in 2022. It was quite easy to observe how there was a type of Israel hate for Israel that has sneaked into this group and was kind of used under the name of post-colonial attitudes, and they claim that Israel is a strong state, and this is your reflex to protect those who are weaker. So this all plays a role in Kassel in 2022. We were able to see that, but all these things, they are just what we were able to see at the Berlinale a few weeks ago as well. To have a bourgeois audience who think that they are more left-leaning and liberal. What's shocking here is the lack of empathy for Jewish people and Jewish people being victims. That was shocking to see at the Berlinale. That they were wearing those Palestine scarves, and they were giving these speeches talking about genocide. So this high vocabulary they used about genocide, they just took that over without thinking about it, without criticism. They didn't think about Jewish victims. And what was very interesting with the Berlinale as well, that there were people who shouting and heckling, who wanted a peace for Palestinians and Israelis, and they were actually shouted at by the audience that they didn't want to hear that. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Barbara Wintz, please. Barbara Wintz raised her hand. I can't hear her. Daphne may.
Seems she might have dropped out. Oh, she has to. Barbara, you need to accept become a panelist to speak. Yes. Perhaps take the next question and then SG.
The next question was by Christoph Gassenschmidt, and whilst Ms. Wind will be promoted, we listen to Christoph Gassenschmidt's question. I can add something to that. Your perception, I can actually confirm that. I was conducting an interview with Miss Professor Bernstein, who founded an initiative at universities, people who work there, Jewish professors who work there, and who also were just desperate and didn't know how to deal with that situation, that they personally excluded them. That it happens all over Germany, and not just in Germany. But there were lecturers, if they came from Israel, they have facing a very difficult situation at German universities at the moment. They have difficulties actually being able to conduct seminars that are pushed by people, they're ignored by their colleagues, excluded by their colleagues. Those non-Israel Jewish professors also try to hide their Jewish identity. That's one level. But when you talk about Jewish topics or Middle East topics or organized on university, that should be possible at the university. That does actually not work at some universities. You have to use a security service, and you need to check backs. That's a situation that's entirely new. This happens in all of Germany and probably also in other countries in Europe, but not just in Berlin, but this goes to show the dimension of how a tsunami of anti-Semitism hits the world. It's like groups waited for the 7th of October in order to be able to articulate what they were thinking all time long. Of course, the 7th of October was a traumatic incident for Israel, but what was triggered was nothing that was new, but it was mentalities that and attitudes that were already there and existed for years, and you were able to see when you left the academic groups. And just to explain it in a nutshell, and just to show you how people usually react. In 2014, I went to a demonstration for by Arabs and Palestinians, Turkish people, roughly 1,000 or 2,000 people at the Alexander Platz Square in Berlin. They showed Hamas flags, and the demonstration were passing the Humboldt University, and one of the people who had a microphone were shouting, "This is the Jewish museum," which I thought was really interesting, to mistake the university for a museum. The people then shouted Al Akbar. I thought it was kind of entertaining, but what I did not find entertaining was when the protesters found an older Jewish married couple. He was wearing a kippah, and 30 people tried to attack them, and they only got away because there were policemen there who were able to protect them. They tried to attack the Jewish people. They were shouting, "Give us the Jewish people, we want to slaughter them." None of them were arrested. If those were neo-Nazis, who are also a danger, I don't want to say they're less of a danger. If those were neo-Nazis, I am sure that these policemen would have reacted in a different way. And this, I think it's a German phenomenon, probably, and has something to do with this big fear of having when you say anything against or do anything against migrant criminals, you people think you are a racist or you're Islamophobe, you're close to the AfD party. And when there are conflicts with police or the justice system, these groups mention these things. Mark, I can't hear you. Okay, Barbara Wind, now, please. Uh, your microphone is muted. You need to switch on your microphone. Yes. with good two more people want to say something, Harry Jackson and Judith Barsky. We actually don't have much time left, but Ralf, if it's okay with you, we can go a little over time, and I can give these two people the opportunity to say something. Judith Barsky is next.
Good evening. I first would like to thank you for your very broad presentation and very interesting presentation. I myself am a researcher of Islamist movements and the left wing in the United States, where they have a very strong alliance. And you mentioned Samidun, which is actually a branch of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and has been officially banned by the Israeli government as a terrorist organization because they've been raising funds in Europe and the United States and bringing it in order to carry out attacks in Israel. So I don't know if that is possibly a possibility of it being banned in Germany for such activity. So that's one question. And the other question is, do you see a strong alliance between Islamic extremist organizations and the far left wing? You've described it, but do you see a strong alliance between them?
Going to answer in German once again. So I mentioned Samidun beforehand. Samidun is now, as I mentioned before, in November last year, they were banned. They were banned from doing any kind of activities, but there were also always the big players in the wake after the 7th of October. What's made Samidun very unique is that they are really the connection between what I think I said it as well. They are the connection between the classical left-wing extremist milieu and also the migrants and Islamistic groups on the other hand side. What's interesting here is with on the topic of the Middle East, these differences were not visible anymore. The left-wing extremists and extremist migrant groups approached each other. They agreed on the topic, despite the fact that very different views on the world. And in the context of Israel, all of these differences were no longer relevant, and they acted in a joint manner. So I think that's an interesting phenomenon, and I think that's different kind of migrant communities in the US when you compare them to Germany or France. But I think Samidun is the connection between these groups. And I think the topic of the Middle East is also the big bracket that somehow unites all of these groups. So if there's one topic that can mobilize all of them and make them go onto the streets together, it's a topic of Israel that can do that. And right after the 7th of October, we were able to see that, but that didn't only have to happen after the 7th of October. You could go back 10 years. In 2014, you were able to see that during the first big demonstrations. But that's a different topic, actually. They also tried to get in contact with a different kind of group that's more connected to the right wing extremists. There was some kind of component in there in 2014. On all of these groups, whether it is a right-wing group, they suddenly can unite on the street for a demonstration. So last question, Harry Jackson.
I'll make it very quick. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. My father was a German Jew who escaped Nazi Germany, so this revival is obviously very upsetting. I wanted to say that I work at Columbia University, so from anecdotal evidence, not everything, but there are many similarities. And I find just from, my own eyewitness accounts of those who are showing up for, anti-Israel demonstrations tend to be the typical leftist crowd, young students, not foreign. I did have a question about why there weren't arrests, but you already answered it, like when there have been Israeli or Jewish people attacked. So you explained why they hadn't been arrested. So thank you for answering that question. And I wanted to say that I am friends or colleagues with a high school teacher outside of Paris who is Muslim, and she fights anti-Semitism in France and brings her students to Auschwitz. So I'd like to know the name of the teacher you mentioned who brings his students from Germany to Israel, if you remember. If not, I'll give you my email so you can. Oh, wow. Mhm. Okay. Oh, Daphne has my email. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do it in German. I keep getting confused about the languages. But you had a great discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Balke, for this really great presentation. Thank you for being with us. And also a little note, actually 2 little notes. There's still some seats for the Summer Institute in Oxford. If you want to learn more about it, you can take a look at the ISGAP webpage, where we talk about how to react to anti-Semitism in academic areas. So this and how we can work on this in the curriculum of universities. You can learn more about it on the website, and also like to draw some attention to the next week's webinar. Our presenter talks about the BDS movement. I would very much recommend that presentation. The presenter wrote a book about the BDS, a very good book about the BDS movement and the boycott movement that existed before BDS. We always debate whether BDS is anti-Semitic or not, and Alex has very good answers on that come from the history of the movement, and I would be happy to see you there and in one of the next webinar. And thank you all for being here.